all of those things that you said comes back to staying in your lane and asking the right person out of that list, the right questions for the right part of the advice. Because that was a really good point about, speak to your broker, speak to your solicitor, your accountant, financial planner, whatever it might be in their space. Because superannuation can also come into that conversation, and it depends on the purpose of the place and all that sort of stuff. But we so often hear of people, with due respect, getting their tax advice from the real estate agent because the real estate agent told them that they could do this with it, or how they could borrow. You'd find that as well.
We're talking about, being realistic when we're going to purchase or sell a home. And, you'll be in areas, and I'm just looking at someone who's selling at the moment, and they've got it in between a certain range. And what you do is you look at all the properties that have been sold around there, what stages and how long ago, et cetera, so you can follow the market and make sure it's right for selling or buying or whatever. But then the emotion comes in. If it's not selling as soon as they want it to sell, the emotion comes in. If they need to sell it, they have to sell, and they won't get what they want. So how do you deal with it? How do you get your clients to process that?
Well, my approach, you look for signs. There's always telltale signs.
Yeah.
We talked about people having to sell, and selling under sufferance is the last thing you want.
It's horrible.
It is terrible. And you'll talk to the agent. So I'll be talking to the seller's agent, and you get some information. You may not get it all, but you can tell if some house was bought maybe 1 or 2 years before. You start asking questions. Well, why are we selling in a year or two time? There could be a separation. There could be, again, there could be a shortfall. They found that they're overspent. So unfortunately, there are times where you can potentially buy something a little under market value because someone is forced to sell a property that is not under normal conditions. They're under, strained conditions. So that's what you look out for, and it's unfortunate, but it happens a lot. A lot of people think that you make money in property. Not everybody does.
And it's a long-term thing. It's not a short-term thing, isn't it?
Every time that you look at a property, have a look at when it last sold, and sometimes people are selling it at a loss.
Yes.
It happens more often than you think, because we portray this thing that everyone can make money in property, but not every time you make money in property. And you should have the understanding as to why you're buying in the first place. If it's your forever home and you're going to be there for 20 years, well, spending that little bit more may not mean that much at the end of the day. But if you're buying it for an investment, if you're overspending, you're not going to make money on it. You may lose money.
Yeah, and where you buy in too in that property cycle.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, "Oh, I've made money. I'm good at this." It was just a fluke, probably, that they've bought at a certain time, and the property prices have all increased.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're good at it. It just means that you managed to time the market.
You were lucky,
fortunately,
at the time. But it's also, looking at, as you say, Jane, if it's a long-term property, a family home, and you want to live in it for 20, 30, 40 years, and then you go to sell it, you think about all the money that you've actually spent on it over the years. Think about the money that you bought it for, which would be, 20 or 40 years ago, it'd be a pretty nice sum, actually. But these days, it's not. So they can make a profit. There are a lot of houses being pulled down now that are older houses, and there are apartments and all sorts of things being built now. And that could be something that the people that need to downsize can find a property developer to develop their property and make some money on it.
Can I jump? Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was just going to, I can come back to it, but tax is a really big part of this conversation. Yeah, sorry, you finished that part.
I say there's cycles as well, because we all talk about property and time in the market. So buying it for 20 years, yes, you can actually erase any errors that you've made early on. But if you time a market, and we talk about the Victorian market only, well, if I was buying 2 or 3 years ago in WA, in Queensland, you could actually get great returns from an investment side. But now 2 years ago, Victoria was the sort of the area that you didn't want to invest in, the land taxes, but the narrative can change because it all comes down to affordability. To people, after a while, people realize, hey, we're getting great value, could be 20, 30 kilometers from the city. If you compare that to, say, Brisbane or Sydney, you may be paying 30, 40% more. So things come in cycles. And if you can actually time the cycle, purchase a property, and it's an investment. We all are afraid to talk about buying a property and making money. Well, if we don't have property investors, then you don't have housing because the government can't provide all the housing needed. So you need these property investors, even though you're tired of the brush that, you're in your, again, I said before, you're counting your money. But going back to that question that you asked, well, can you make money? Yes, but it's part of a cycle as well.
A strategy.
It's strategy. You have to have a plan. You have to speak to your mortgage broker. The mortgage broker is so not expensive.
Vital.
Vital. We actually make a mistake. But you have to speak to your accountant as well. You can't be just speaking to a buyer's agent to do it for you.
Well,
you have to have a great team around.
Well, that's exactly right. You have to have a great team around you, and it's not just the real estate agent, the buyer's agent, or and the mortgage broker, the accountant, the lawyer, the conveyancer. The conveyancer, so they're doing the right thing by it. The pest and inspection, just to make sure the property is sound, so that you're not having to spend X amount of dollars after you've purchased it.
All of those things,
because
that
once
you
you
said
sign that
comes back
contract,
to staying
it's
in your
signed.
lane,
You can't get out
and
of it.
asking the right person out of that list, the right questions for the right part of the advice. Because that was a really good point about, speak to your broker, speak to your solicitor, your accountant, financial planner, whatever it might be in their space. Because superannuation can also come into that conversation, and it depends on the purpose of the place and all that sort of stuff. But we so often hear of people, with due respect, getting their tax advice from the real estate agent because the real estate agent told them that they could do this with it, or how they could borrow. You'd find that as well. And, it's for each person and each property, there's a different scenario, and that scenario can change as they change their intentions and so on. So with all of those things, I think it's just worth, reiterating.
The tax.
Have the right expert. Don't just think, I've talked to one person, it's all good. Like, you've got to have the right people asking the right questions for your particular scenario.
And educating you. And that is with that team of people who are knowledgeable in that area so that they can advise you. You go away and you have a think about it, and then you might have more questions. You might go back and ask that question, but you might need to ask a mortgage broker. You might need to ask a buyer's agent. So, or the lawyer or the conveyancer or whomever it might be. But you have to have an understanding of every aspect of purchasing a property.
As it relates to you at that point in time, because they're the changeable parts. And you guys would be the same, but we see examples of very costly mistakes. I had recently had some new clients come to me, and they're paying off a really hefty capital gains tax bill because they sold a property that they, whoever had told them it would not be capital gains taxable, and it actually was. So that wasn't factored in, and so on and so forth. And then primary residence is a big one that people think, oh, well, it's my principal residence, so I won't have to pay tax on it. So then they do the renos, and that's my primary residence, and then I do another one. Well, the ATO doesn't automatically allow that primary residence exemption. Capital gains tax rules actually outweigh that if you're making a repetitive pattern of doing that. So there are things like this that you have to get good advice for in that specific scenario. And the other one that we see a lot is people changing the purpose. It was my main house and now it's my holiday house, or vice versa. You can't say Mr. Smith lives there, Mrs. Smith lives there, so we can claim main residence for both of them. And another one that's coming up a lot is the property development, the knocking down or the building in my backyard, the subdivisions, the stratas, all that sort of stuff. So as soon as you start doing any of that, you've changed the nature of the property, and the tax scenario for you changes from what it was beforehand. So these are all the things that can really cost a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes and potentially stamp duty, So you're much better off spending a few hundred or a few $1,000s to pay for the advice in those areas, to map out the strategy, to follow through the steps, see what's going to change, what's going to be triggered, what tax impost and other costs of the development, the broking, put the pieces together before you go in thinking this is just a great idea and I'm going to make a lot of money. But we'd all see scenarios like that often, I would imagine, where there's a real sting in the tail because they didn't have that conversation.
Where I find that is, like, for example, if a client comes to me through a friend and I'm the main point of contact, it's sort of trusting me to give the right advice. But it is my duty as a professional to say, this is my lane, this is what I can advise you on. You need to go and talk to that particular professional real estate agent or an accountant. Often people think they know everything. Like, I've seen people who have bought, 2 or 3 properties and they're like, I know everything. So I'm going to advise on this, this and this. And that's where it can go wrong for clients, because ultimately they're trusting one person to give them the advice. But as a professional, it's everybody's duty to sort of turn it then to whoever is responsible.
And that is why we're having this conversation today. It's because we create the awareness around what we need to know and understand when we're buying or selling a property. And
it's not just to drum up work.
No,
it's got nothing to do.
No, it's about education. It's about information, creating that awareness so that people aren't caught and can lose their property. And that can happen if they're not educated in every asset or aspect of purchasing a property. And as you say, Diana, staying in your lane is a really important part. And everyone has a role when they're, of educating them to understand, well, okay, are you aware of this? And 99% of the people are not aware of half of the things that we need to be aware of. And this is why I'm curious.
Including us, which is why we work collaboratively with the other professionals. And as Obu said, you say to people, can you please go and ask your solicitor or your whoever this and come back with that answer so that we can map that into what we're doing and vice versa.
If it doesn't feel right, you get the feel. I get clients coming up to me and saying, look, I want to buy a property so I can save on my income tax. And I said, well, what is the goal here? You're trying to save tax, or you're actually trying to buy a property that's going to appreciate in value? Because a lot of people, and I'm sure you will say, oh, look, I can tax deduct X, Y, and Z. But at the same time, that's an outcome. It's not a reason to buy a property. Again, you can fall into those pitfalls if you don't speak to the right person, or there's property spookers out there that will say, hey, buy this and it's going to go up. Well, where is your data?
I'll buy it in your super fund, they tell them.
You can live in it. So
you get wrong advice, exactly. And if you start off getting wrong advice, the cascade of wrong advice does not just get better, it gets worse.
Yes.
Yeah,
and costly.
Costly and detriment to your life, your health and well-being, your lifestyle, and all those things. So really important to understand it, but it's about that awareness and finding the people that you trust, finding those people that you can trust to ask the questions. You may not ask the right questions to that person, but that person, because you can trust them, will direct you to the person that you need to ask the questions. And they won't direct them to the people if they don't trust them themselves, because that's your reputation.
And sometimes they don't like the answers that we give.
Yeah.
If they've got their heart set on something, but you've got to explain it. That's our job, to explain, here's the, benefits or disadvantages of that, or the things that you need to be careful of or find out before you charge ahead because it's been that impulsive, wow factor thing, which will lose its shine really fast if there's a big sting in the tail somehow.
It's just like my property I'm going to go back to and think, oh, it's only 19 million. It's just a small amount. And you sort of look at it and you think, well, I'll just admire it as I walk past, because that's it. But there are people out there. There's money out there, and there are highly intelligent people versed in these sorts of things that do very well. But there are a lot of people, and I'm looking at the average person on the street who wants to be educated when they're going to buy a property, whether it's a first home buyer, whether it's, you're selling and you want to move somewhere else or whatever, a bit like Victoria, and everyone wanted to leave when it was, that time. And and I think they're still wanting to leave because their taxes and the values of properties that are not being used are being increased so that the government can get more tax.
I think it really comes back, though, to what Dean was saying, is what's the outcome? Is it at this point in time to be your forever home? Is it to be an investment property? And if so, like, what stage of life are you at? Do you have young kids and a lot of expenses, or are you older and planning for retirement, or, you're like, what's the purpose of it? And therefore, where should we be angling? Because it's not that everybody wants a really large $19 million house.
No.
Like, a lot of people might like something smaller and cozier. There's things like the downsizer provision available in Australia to help people's superannuation and so on. So it really comes back to what's appropriate at that point in time, and then building the strategy around it by like all of our input.
Yeah, well, that's why I said I just like the garage.
I was going to say, just make an offer just for the garage.
Also, we talked about the costs and how extensive it is to manage. I had never bought a $19 million property for a client, but you're better off renting it because it's going to cost you so much.
I know.
Find someone that wants it that doesn't have a car, and then Faye can just build the garage.
Do your best. You can get around it. But look, these are real questions, and I know it's hypothetical 19 million, but there are situations where you can make it work for you and don't have to pay $19 million for a puppy. You can really, all your needs and wants, you just have to know what they are. And sometimes the needs, well, you basically, they're non-negotiable, but sometimes the wants, well, I'd love a sauna and I'd love a pool, but I don't have one. I don't see them at the local bars. That's how I get around it.
Yeah, sort of things that you need to be aware of when you go and buy a property that is in, surrounded by other homes or units or townhouses or whatever. What sort of things do you need to be aware of there?
Look, just from the property perspective, I can talk about knowing there's strata costs, there's cost to maintain a property, it's not just about paying the mortgage. These strata costs, if there's elevators, if there's pools, if there's saunas, if there's, common air.
Needs a new roof.
Well, look, I've had situations, and we can talk specific numbers, where I've had a client, they were trying to sell their property for around $800,000. The strata on the property for the next 4 years was going to be $19,000 for 3 years, dropping down to $17,000. That's per year. So you get into a property that does look good from a distance, but when you drill down to the numbers, and from a mortgage perspective and accounting perspective, you'll find out pretty quickly what those numbers are, because you'll have to pay for it, and it just gets really expensive. So it's more about avoiding these costs because you know what they are, and get the right people, someone to read the contract. I've had clients where they'd read it, they said, look, Dean, I don't really understand this contract. I said, what are you talking about? I'm reading it. I said, well, you're not supposed to understand the contract. You give it to a property lawyer or conveyancer. Oh, okay, I didn't know I could do that. I said, well, no, but that's where my job comes in, to say, okay, well, they do that, and we know exactly what the running costs. So going back to, a large apartment complex. Now, also the drawback buying something like in a 200 apartment complex is you might buy it for a certain dollar, but what if the other person has to sell and they sell it at a loss? Well, then that can actually drag down the value of your property as well. So even though you bought it for an amount that you thought it was worth, if someone else has to sell it for different reasons, breaking up, or they just need to move overseas and they'll sell it at a loss, then the banks will actually say, hey, your property's not worth that. It's worth the comparable, which is the one that they're selling at a lower amount.
And what about trusts? I mean, having a trust, if they've bought a property and they put it into a trust.
I'm going to vote don't go there, but Joe, that's that's really, really dicey.
Really dicey. Yeah,
But again, get the advice. What's the objective? What's the point of it?
And what the costs are, because it all sounds good.
That's a footy kind of piece of advice, actually. Trusting. Sorry, Dean.
Yeah, no, that was exactly the same thing. Is make sure you know what the costs are with every every kind of strategy you're looking at, whether it's trust, whether it's super, whether it's in your personal name. I think that's really important.
Cost benefit at the object.
Protect yourselves.
Yeah. Things like income protection insurance and what sort of entity it's held in. Is it a trust? Is it personal names? Superannuation, all those sorts of things. Because again, there's a lot of a great advice that floats around on a weekend that we all recoil from when
Around the Barbie.
Yeah, when people ask us about, no, don't do that, don't do that.
Now it's on your phone. You can scroll. All of a sudden, I look at some property, and then all of a sudden, I've got 15 ads with 15 different experts, and you do have to decipher all that.
I have people send me screenshots of stuff saying, "Can we do this?" I'm like, not legally, no.
But it's funny, isn't it, how we as humans have a different expectation to what the true experience is. And I think it's really important that, and as I said, this is why I'm doing this, because I want to create that awareness with experts in your fields to get the viewers to understand they need to ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. It's really important to ask the questions. It doesn't matter if it's the wrong question. The person you're asking can guide you to the right person or whatever it might be. So never be afraid to ask the question, whatever it is. Now, I want from each of you a little bit of advice to people that are thinking about buying, selling, or borrowing money, or saving money, or tax, or whatever. So let's start with you, Dean.
I think the first bit of advice I could give is don't do it on your own, and make sure that, we talked about things being boring. Don't worry about boring. Worry about not making a mistake. So use your accountant, use your mortgage broker. Speak to a advised agent. You may not need to use them if you don't want to, but at least you know you've exercised that option. So that's my little summary.
Beautiful. Obu.
From a finance perspective, do your numbers. That's the most important thing. Go with a professional who has your best interests at heart rather than what they're gonna get paid. So that's very important.
Beautiful. And Diana?
I would come back to the box on the page, get clear on what you want and why you want it. You might not know the exact mechanics of that, but where are your boundaries? Because your choice, the emotions, the impulsivity, the amount that you borrow, and certainly things like the tax treatment can change when you change any of those little pieces in that. And that's where people get caught, because they made a decision based on this, but then they decided to do that, not knowing that then made it taxable, for instance, things like that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much for your wisdom and expertise. It's been great conversation. I've loved it. We'll have to come back for some more, because I know there's a lot more to have a conversation about, it. And what this show is all about is creating awareness, educating you to understand so that you don't get caught spending unnecessary money when it's not necessary. So remember, you've got the experts. If you haven't got the right questions to ask them anyway, and they will steer you in the right direction of who to ask and where to get that information. So thank you. I'm Faye. This has been Conversations with Faye. Thank you, Dean, Obu, and Diana, for your expertise. And I'll be back with another conversation soon. Bye for now. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Instagram. Changing lives, one conversation at a time.